recent time that you almost hit an animal or you almost got in a car wreck and multiply that times 1,000. That's how it feels when someone has anxiety. Also, if you think about the room spinning and sounds being amplified by 1,000, that is also what it feels like for someone who suffers from mental illness. Today I'm going to talk about how to efficiently communicate with someone who is currently suffering from feelings like that. Even if you're not choosing to work in the medical field, it's still a good idea to utilize some of these tips because you may have family members who suffer from mental illness. So it can never hurt to be more educated about efficiently communicating with patients. After experiencing a communication breakdown with patients who suffer from mental illness, that was when I chose to do a little bit of research on how to better speak with people that are currently suffering. I will explain some basic communication skills today for communicating with someone who's currently suffering from a mental illness. I will focus on nonverbal and verbal cues along with some of the downfalls in regards to people who aren't currently medically educated enough. There's some basic verbal and nonverbal communication skills that we all need to know about. Verbal being speaking, talking, anything verbally that you're doing with someone who you're trying to communicate with. Nonverbal could be considered any kind of cues, sounds, grunts, facial expressions, touch could be considered nonverbal. Getting in someone's personal space can be considered nonverbal. A volume from the Law Enforcement Technology book that I accessed on June 29th discusses the issues that law enforcement encounters while trying to communicate with people suffering from mental illness. The text speaks about how actions speak louder than words and how they use those skills to efficiently try to calm down suspects who are suffering from mental illness, patients who they're trying to help out and they're currently being combative or suffering from mental illness, things like that. So they talk a lot about skills that help out in that degree. The article is called The Invisible Man. And so one of the things that they talk about is how when you come across someone who's suffering from mental illness, if you can't calm them down to the point where you can explain to them that you're not trying to hurt them and that you're trying to help them, they're not going to efficiently be able to get them in a place where they can get some help. And so one of the things that they talk about is the nonverbal and the verbal cues. And so if a police officer in law enforcement was to approach someone who's currently suffering from some type of psychosis, they are to approach them like with their arms crossed and like bad body language, facial expressions. It's going to automatically cause issues, and the patient's going to kind of close off and not be receptive. So that's a really important thing when it comes to nonverbal. Trying to give choices to the individuals who are suffering. So a lot of times if you put the choice into the person's hand that's suffering, they feel like they have a little bit more control of their situation, and so they're a little bit more apt to allow law enforcement to help them out. And so that's another good option. Establishing whether or not you are communicating efficiently. So there needs to be some establishment as in how well you're communicating. So a lot of that can be told by the type of response that you're getting from the person. They also discuss in that article how law enforcement gets into the mind of someone who's hallucinating. And what they do is actually have a software that was developed by a pharmaceutical company. And what happens is law enforcement actually uses this software and it stimulates visual hallucinations. So law enforcement can actually put this software and these glasses on and see what a person who's hallucinating would see. And so that gives them a different perspective into trying to be able to help them in a situation where they're having a psychotic break or they're hallucinating. We also need to look at the different stages of psychosis to be more familiar with how to help someone that's in a psychosis. Because if we don't understand the stages, we can't efficiently know what exactly is going on at that moment in time and how to respond to it. So on June 29th, I accessed a mental health practice journal titled How Expert Nurses Communicate with Acutely Psychotic Patients, written by Bowers L. the journal discusses the challenges involved in communicating with patients in different stages of psychosis. So the first stage of psychosis is called the Prodrome Phase. So this one is mostly covered by irritability, sleep disturbance, change in perception, feeling of uncontrollable ideas, suspiciousness, being disconnected. Acute phase, that's when they're having hallucinations, delusions, that's phase 2. And then we also have the third phase, which is the recovery phase. So their symptoms are less intense, and their desire to be combative is much less at that point. So understanding those phases helps us to be able to communicate efficiently with someone. If we can recognize what point of the psychosis they're in, then we can communicate a little bit more efficiently. Communication skills are key to gain trust and build relationships with patients who are currently suffering from mental illness. Different approaches are needed depending on the different type of stage of psychosis. Apathetic or withdrawn patients, so we use a lot of distraction, stress management. We agree on a care plan, develop a routine, a purpose, take step-by-step approach. When we have hallucinating patients who are in that phase 2, we also do stress management, distraction. We look at coping skills, and we also try to cast doubt or challenge whatever it is. So if they're hallucinating about someone who's stalking them or following them, we try to cast doubt so that they start to doubt what it is that they're hallucinating about. And then upset and distressed patients, talking about staying calm, keeping the patient talking, find out the cause, taking action to relieve the cause, and exploring other solutions. And while communicating with patients in all of these stages, nurses must regulate their own emotional responses. So depending on the type of patients they're dealing with and the type of responses they're getting, they have to regulate how they respond too. So in a situation where they would want to be more empathetic and caring, they may not be able to be that way depending on what stage of psychosis the patient's in. And on June 29th, I accessed a NCBI medical journal titled Teaching Medical Students to Communicate with Patients with Major Mental Illness. This journal explains the importance of medical students in the medical field gaining experience with patients who are suffering from mental health. So our biggest obstacle is these medical students go into residency and they don't get the chance to have the interaction with patients who are suffering with mental illness. They're also fear those patients. The physicians who are they're under also sometimes have a fear of those patients. So it tends to be that they get kind of pushed to the side, and they get their residency with a lot of other situations, and they miss out on the mental health. They also are not familiar with the version of the manual that we use to code the diagnoses for mental health. So we have a book for that, which is the DSM-IV, Diagnostic Manual for Mental Disorders. And so without being familiar with that book, they're not going to be familiar with terms that are related to a lot of those different mental disorders. Students' observations revolved around 4 themes for these students not getting the perspective that they needed. Fear and anxiety about interacting with a person that suffers from mental illness. That was one of the reasons. Residents protecting students from the patients with a major mental illness. And then lack of clinical maturity. They don't have the clinical maturity to be able to do what they need to do in regards to psychiatric rotations. Students often said that because they had no personal experience with mental illness, they couldn't really understand what their patients were going through. So because they haven't actually been in those shoes, they don't really know how to respond. And so that was another reason that they didn't feel as comfortable helping people with, say, schizophrenia or bipolar, because they've never experienced it themselves. So today, I introduced some basic skills that will help you obtain a better understanding of patients suffering from a mental illness. I've also discussed some of the reasons why we need to be able to communicate more efficiently and where we are lacking in that respect. It's very possible for you to use any of these skills that I've discussed to help you efficiently communicate with patients who are suffering from mental illness. It should also provide you with a much clearer understanding of how these patients feel and the means of why they're suffering. Helping someone with a mental illness feel a little better about their current situation can really make a huge difference. We can use these skills to help them get their life back on track so that they can be successful. It can mean the world to someone who feels helpless and alone.